We must stop the killings. We must stop this war. With these words, the president of Ukraine set the tone for a high-stakes meeting in Washington that brought together not only U.S. leaders but also the weight of Europe. The conversation was framed as more than just another diplomatic exchange. It came after earlier talks with Russia and ahead of discussions with leaders from the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, Finland, and the European Union. For Kyiv, it was a moment to reaffirm that Ukraine is not alone, that Western support remains the backbone of its resistance. Gratitude was expressed not only to President Trump, but also to the First Lady of the United States, who had personally sent a message to Vladimir Putin on the issue of Ukrainian children affected by the war. The Ukrainian First Lady, too, carried that message forward, an emotional reminder that beyond politics lie families, children, and futures at stake. Reporters, however, pressed the conversation into sharper terms. One asked, who really has the power to end this war? President Zelensky insists Russia must stop the aggression it started. Former President Trump, in turn, suggested Ukraine could bring hostilities to a close almost immediately if it wished. He floated the idea of a trilateral meeting involving Washington, Moscow, and Kyiv, calling it a reasonable chance to end the fighting. But the uncertainty was palpable. When asked whether American support for Ukraine was nearing its limit, Trump was careful not to draw a line. "It's never the end of the road," he said, acknowledging the heavy toll. Thousands dead in recent weeks alone, with millions affected since the conflict began nearly 4 years ago. Trump emphasized that this was not my war, pointing a finger at the Biden administration's role, but stressed that he wanted a resolution good for everybody. On the Ukrainian side, the picture was grimmer. Zelensky spoke of daily attacks, injured civilians, even a small child wounded by a bomb. His message was clear. Ukraine has no choice but to fight back, and it cannot do so without Western aid. At the same time, he welcomed Trump's proposal for trilateral talks, seeing in it a signal that diplomacy might offer a path forward. Still, one question lingers in the air. If peace were to be negotiated, what would it look like? Would Ukraine have to give up territory? Would American troops ever step in as peacekeepers? These are questions neither leader answered directly, but they will shape the debate in the weeks to come. And so we arrive at the heart of the matter. Is this the dawn of a real chance for peace, or simply another round of political maneuvering? This cannot be a short-term peace. If peace comes, it must endure. With these words, Donald Trump emphasized that any agreement between Ukraine and Russia must not simply pause the bloodshed, but end it for good. He insisted that diplomacy should prevent the world from falling back into the same crisis in just a few years. Trump stressed that Washington would coordinate closely with both Kyiv and Moscow, as well as with European allies. Security guarantees, he noted, would play a central role. When asked whether U.S. troops might ever be directly involved, he avoided a firm answer, hinting only that this issue would be discussed with European leaders later that day. For now, he underlined that Europe stands on the front line, but America's backing will remain crucial. When pressed about Russia's insistence on addressing the root causes of the war, Trump responded with characteristic certainty. The war will end because it must. He claimed both President Zelensky and President Putin want to bring it to a close, adding that the whole world is tired of it. Reflecting on his record, Trump said he had ended 6 wars in the past, though this conflict has proven far more complicated than he expected. By comparison, he pointed to other drawn-out struggles, from India and Pakistan to Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, as evidence of how conflicts can drag on for decades, if not resolved decisively. European voices, meanwhile, loom large in this process. Trump mentioned his upcoming meeting with leaders from 7 powerful nations, all eager to see peace restored. Their perspectives, he suggested, would shape the way forward. The central question remains what peace would mean in practice. Would Ukraine have to surrender land not yet taken by Russian forces in order to secure an end to fighting? Trump avoided a direct answer, reiterating only that the outcome must be a lasting peace, not another fragile ceasefire. Emotions also entered the discussion through a deeply personal gesture. The U.S. First Lady sent a handwritten letter to Vladimir Putin, appealing to him to consider the future of children affected by the war. The Ukrainian First Lady personally delivered it. This act underscored the human dimension of the conflict. Beyond geopolitics lie millions of children whose lives have been shattered by violence. Whether such symbolic steps can sway hardened political decisions is uncertain, but they highlight the human cost that often gets lost in talk of strategy and territory. And so the question hangs in the balance. What does a lasting peace truly mean? An agreement that sacrifices territory for stability, or one that insists on justice without compromise? We want to see something other than funerals. With this poignant line, Donald Trump described the motivation behind the First Lady's personal letter to Vladimir Putin. Melania Trump, he explained, has a deep love for children and was moved by the suffering she witnessed. The letter, he said, was a heartfelt appeal for peace, received with respect, even if the road ahead remains uncertain. Beyond the symbolism, the conversation shifted to politics and democracy. A reporter asked President Zelensky whether Ukraine would consider holding elections if peace were achieved. Zelensky confirmed that elections are possible but only under secure conditions. As long as missiles rain down, voting stations cannot function. A ceasefire, he stressed, would be essential before democratic processes could resume. His remarks underscored a painful reality. War suspends not only lives, but also the very institutions meant to protect them. Trump seized the moment with a rhetorical jab. If wars prevent elections, what would that mean for America if it were ever in conflict? The comment, delivered half in jest, pointed to the broader tension between war and democracy. When security collapses, can political legitimacy truly survive? The discussion then turned sharply toward the media. One journalist posed a provocative question: does the American press even want peace? Trump argued that much of the media has been hostile to his efforts, claiming they would call any settlement, no matter how favorable, a bad deal. He insisted that even if Ukraine gained vast concessions, headlines would still frame his role negatively. This, he said, has been the pattern since before his first election. Positive coverage gave way to relentless criticism. Yet he reminded the audience that despite this, he still won in a landslide, suggesting that public opinion mattered more than editorial lines. Zelensky, by contrast, largely stayed on message: Ukraine's resilience, its democratic values, and its dependence on allies. Still, the exchange highlighted an important dimension. Narratives shape politics as much as policies. Public trust, media framing, and international perception all feed into whether peace initiatives gain traction or fall apart. At the heart of this debate lies a crucial dilemma. Can peace efforts succeed when trust in institutions, whether political, democratic, or media, is fractured on so many fronts? If Putin comes, they say, "I lost." If he doesn't come, they say, "I lost." There's no winning with the press. With this remark, Donald Trump returned to one of his recurring themes: the media's treatment of his leadership. He argued that when Vladimir Putin visited the United States, commentators framed it as a defeat for him, even though in his view it was a diplomatic breakthrough. The problem, Trump insisted, is not the events themselves, but the way they are portrayed by what he calls a dishonest press. He then pivoted to domestic matters, offering Washington, D.C. as proof of his effectiveness. Once plagued by crime, the city, he claimed, has become safe again under his leadership. He recounted stories of friends, Democrats among them, who told him they had gone out to dinner for the first time in years without fear. To Trump, bustling restaurants and families walking the streets without incident are the real markers of progress. But, he complained, rather than highlighting this, critics brand him a dictator. In his words, all he wants is security for our people. The conversation quickly returned to Ukraine. A journalist asked whether his earlier warnings of severe consequences if a ceasefire were not reached still stood. Trump's answer revealed a central piece of his negotiating style. He prefers direct peace deals over temporary pauses. In his view, ceasefires risk giving one side time to rebuild, prolonging conflict rather than ending it. Still, he acknowledged that a truce has one undeniable advantage. You stop killing people immediately. Yet he suggested peace can be achieved even as battles rage, pointing to his past record of brokering agreements without formal ceasefires. The discussion then shifted to NATO. Why, reporters asked, had Trump signaled support for strong security guarantees to Ukraine while stopping short of promising full membership? He reminded the audience that long before the current war, Moscow had made it clear that NATO expansion into Ukraine was unacceptable. While refusing to commit to membership, Trump promised that the United States and its allies would provide very good protection, very good security. Talks on this, he added, were still to come. Finally, the spotlight turned to money. With the United States already having provided hundreds of billions of dollars in aid to Kyiv, and the conflict still grinding on with no clear winner, Trump was pressed. How much more is Washington willing to spend? It was the question hanging in the air, one that touches not only on foreign policy but also on domestic politics, taxpayer fatigue, and America's role as global leader. And so the challenge crystallizes. Can the United States continue to bankroll Ukraine's defense while also convincing its own citizens that this is a fight worth sustaining? We're not giving anything away. We're selling weapons. With that declaration, Donald Trump drew a sharp distinction between his approach to military aid and that of the Biden administration. He accused his successor of funneling more than $300 billion into Ukraine's defense without accountability, while portraying his own stance as transactional. Support, yes, but on terms that benefit the United States. He argued that if he had remained president, the war would never have erupted in the first place, saving millions of lives and preventing mass displacement. Biden, he insisted, was a corrupt and incompetent leader, responsible for the conflict as well as failures at home. President Zelensky offered a different perspective. Ukraine, he explained, is grateful for the opportunity to purchase U.S. weapons and relies on NATO programs and European funding to finance much of it. Air defense in particular remains a critical need. Zelensky highlighted the importance of systems like the U.S.-made Patriot batteries, technology he called indispensable for protecting Ukraine's skies and rebuilding its military strength. This is not only about the war, he noted, but also about long-term security guarantees. Trump seized on that point, praising American defense technology as the best in the world. He described the Patriot system in striking terms, like two bullets colliding in midair with nearly perfect accuracy. While he acknowledged NATO's role in supplying equipment to Ukraine, he emphasized that the U.S. is being paid for its hardware, unlike under Biden when aid flowed freely. Trump claimed that in just 2 months his efforts had advanced peace talks further than 4 years of Biden's leadership, though he maintained the war should have never happened at all. The conversation then shifted abruptly from foreign policy to domestic politics. A reporter asked Trump about his recent social media post calling for the elimination of mail-in ballots and electronic voting machines. Trump did not hesitate. Mail-in ballots are corrupt. You can never have a real democracy with them. He vowed to issue an executive order to abolish their use, describing them as a source of massive fraud. He also criticized electronic voting systems as unnecessarily costly, insisting that paper ballots are cheaper and more secure. In this exchange, two worlds collided: Ukraine's immediate battle for survival and America's internal struggle over the rules of its own democracy. Both conversations, however, revolved around a single theme: trust. Trust in weapons to defend a nation, trust in allies to provide support, trust in elections to reflect the people's will. The question now is, can leaders restore that trust in global security and in democracy itself before it slips too far away? Without fair elections and secure borders, you don't have a country. With this sweeping claim, Donald Trump shifted from foreign policy back to one of his most familiar battlefields: election integrity. He argued that only paper ballots, complete with watermarks and security features, can guarantee trustworthy results. In his telling, machines are slow, unreliable, and open to manipulation, while mail-in voting is nothing short of fraud. He even invoked former President Jimmy Carter's past warnings about absentee ballots, insisting that Democrats rely on such methods to win because, as he framed it, their policies are so unpopular. Trump linked this argument to broader themes of security, portraying himself as the defender of both the nation's borders and its ballot boxes. He claimed that under his leadership, illegal immigration dropped to 0 within 3 months, a statistic he admitted was surprising even to him. For Trump, this reinforced his central point. Strong borders and honest elections are the twin pillars of national survival. But as the conversation turned back to Ukraine, the stakes grew even higher. Reporters pressed President Zelensky on what kind of guarantees he needed from the United States to secure a lasting peace. His answer was twofold. First, a strong and modernized Ukrainian army, supported by advanced weaponry, training, and intelligence sharing. Second, a framework of international backing, with the U.S. and Europe providing long-term security assurances. Would this mean American troops on the ground? Trump avoided a direct commitment. Instead, he emphasized the role of European allies, many of whom were already gathered nearby for discussions. They want to give protection, he said, adding that Washington would also play its part. For him, the priority was getting the deal done, with a balance of responsibility between the U.S. and its transatlantic partners. This exchange highlighted a striking contrast. Trump's insistence on security at home through border control and election reform, and Zelensky's plea for security abroad through military and diplomatic guarantees. Both leaders use the same word but in very different contexts, one about defending democracy from within, the other about survival against an external aggressor. And so the open question remains, can these parallel visions of security, domestic stability in America and lasting protection for Ukraine, be reconciled into a strategy that satisfies both nations? I love the Ukrainian people. I love the Russian people. I want the war to stop. With this statement, Donald Trump sought to strike a note of universality, framing his vision not in terms of choosing sides but in the broader goal of ending bloodshed. He praised Ukrainians as smart, energetic, and deeply patriotic, but added that his concern extended to all those suffering from the conflict, regardless of nationality. The message was clear. His priority is peace, not perpetuating division. When asked if his recent conversations with Vladimir Putin had left him disappointed, Trump described the situation as a work in progress. He revealed that a direct phone call with the Russian president was scheduled to take place immediately after the current meetings. Whether or not that call results in a trilateral negotiation involving the United States, Russia, and Ukraine could determine the next chapter of the war. If we have a trilateral, there's a good chance of ending it, Trump said. If not, the fighting continues. This moment encapsulated the delicate balance of hope and uncertainty. On one hand, the prospect of diplomacy offers a glimmer of relief for Ukrainians enduring relentless attacks. On the other, the fragile nature of such talks underscores how easily the chance for peace can slip away. The stakes are not only military and political, but deeply human. Millions waiting, with their futures hanging on the outcome of a single phone call. As the meeting drew to a close, the central question lingered. Will this be remembered as the turning point where diplomacy finally ended the war? Or just another fleeting pause in a conflict without resolution?